Ambassador Doyon sat in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, watching as the holographic treaty materialized before him. The document floated in the air, glowing with soft blue light. Around him, representatives from 47 different alien species waited for his response. Some looked bored. Others looked smug. The Vryn ambassador in particular wore what might have been a smile on his reptilian face. The treaty was called the Kinetic Weapons Ban. It prohibited all explosive propellant-based projectile weapons across every member species. In the known galaxy, no guns, no rifles, no cannons, no missiles. The Council had spent 3 years drafting this document after too many colonial disputes had turned into massacres. Humanity was the newest member of the Council, and everyone expected them to complain. Doyon read through the treaty carefully. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Hayaran, stood behind him and whispered that Earth's military would be furious about this. The Human Defense Corps had spent billions developing plasma rifles and railguns. Now all of it would be illegal, but Doyon just nodded slowly. He had been a diplomat for 30 years. He had negotiated trade deals, peace treaties, and territorial agreements across a dozen star systems. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "Does humanity accept the terms?" the council chair asked. The chair was a Zelthari, an ancient creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a tree. Its voice echoed through the chamber. "We accept," Doyon said simply. He pressed his thumb against the holographic document. His genetic signature was recorded. The treaty was now binding. The Vryn ambassador laughed, a hissing sound that made Hiron shiver. "The humans fold so easily," the Vryn said to his companion. "They will be no threat now." Doyon heard this. He said nothing. He just smiled slightly, the kind of smile that made Hiron even more nervous than the alien laughter. 3 weeks later, Doyon returned to Earth. He walked through the halls of the Defense Corps' headquarters in Geneva, carrying a data chip with the signed treaty. Officers and soldiers watched him pass. Many of them looked angry. Some looked betrayed. One young captain actually spat on the ground as Doyon walked by. Captain Minji was waiting in the briefing room. She stood at attention when Doyon entered, but her jaw was tight. She had served in the Human Defense Corps for 15 years. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had defended colonies from raiders. And now this old man had just surrendered their weapons. "At ease, Captain," Doyon said. He placed the data chip on the table between them. "I know you're angry. Permission to speak freely, sir?" Minji asked. "Granted. You just disarmed humanity. The Vryn have been attacking our mining colonies for 6 months. The pirates in the Outer Rim know we're weak now. How exactly are we supposed to defend ourselves with no weapons?" Doyon opened his briefcase and pulled out a very old book. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. He placed it next to the data chip. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Minji looked at the book. The title read Medieval Warfare, a History. "It's a history book," she said slowly. "It's a reminder," Doyon replied. He opened the book to a marked page. It showed a drawing of soldiers carrying long wooden bows. The treaty bans explosive propellant-based weapons. Guns use gunpowder, which explodes. Railguns use electromagnetic propulsion. Plasma weapons use superheated energy. All banned. "Yes, I can read," Minji said. Doyon smiled. "But crossbows use mechanical tension. Bows use limb flex. Slingshots use elastic potential energy. None of those involve explosives or propellant." Minji stared at him. Then she grabbed the data chip and pulled up the treaty on the room's holographic display. She read through it line by line. Her eyes grew wider with each paragraph. "They didn't think to ban these?" she whispered. "They didn't think humans would be crazy enough to use them," Doyon said. "Every species in the Council abandoned these weapons 10,000 years ago. They think of them as toys, museum pieces. They can't imagine anyone actually fighting with them." Minji looked at the book again. She turned the pages, seeing drawings of longbowmen, crossbowmen, and siege weapons. Humans had used these weapons for thousands of years. They had won battles with them. They had conquered continents with them. This is insane, she said. This is survival, Doyon corrected. The Council thinks they've neutered us. They think without our advanced weapons, we'll be helpless. They're about to learn something important about humanity. What's that? We've been killing each other for 200,000 years. We got very good at it long before we invented gunpowder. Minji closed the book. She looked at Doyon with new respect. How much time do I have? Your unit deploys to Kepler 442B in 3 months? The Vren have been raiding the mining settlements there? You'll need to be ready. I'll need specialists, Minji said, her mind already working. Engineers, historians, maybe even athletes. This isn't normal military training. You'll have whatever you need, Doyon promised. The Defense Course thinks I'm a fool who surrendered our weapons. Let them think that. You and I know the truth, which is, the most dangerous weapon humanity has ever possessed isn't plasma or bullets. It's our ability to adapt, to improvise, to take whatever we have and turn it into something deadly. Doyon stood up and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back to Minji. The aliens made a mistake, Captain. They think they know what human weapons look like? They're about to learn they have no idea. After he left, Minji sat alone in the briefing room. She pulled up files on her computer. Historical documents about archery. Physics papers on projectile motion. Engineering specifications for composite materials. She found videos of ancient hunting techniques. She read accounts of medieval battles. The more she read, the more she understood what Doyon was planning. It was crazy. It was brilliant. It was the most human response possible to an impossible situation. She sent a message to her second-in-command. Lieutenant Hagen, the message was simple. Clear the armory. Empty everything. We're starting over. Then she sent requisition orders to military supply. They would think she had lost her mind. Wooden shafts, bowstrings, steel tips, elastic cords, fiberglass limbs, carbon fiber frames. Her computer flagged the orders as unusual. A message appeared. These items are not standard military equipment. Please confirm. Minji smiled the same smile Doyon had given her. She pressed confirm somewhere in the Vrin home system. Their military commanders were already planning their next raid on human territory. They calculated their odds. They reviewed human defenses. They noted that the kinetic weapons ban would take effect in 3 months. They assumed it would be easy. They had no idea what was coming. 3 months passed quickly. Firebase Jericho on the mining world of Kepler 442b looked nothing like a modern military base anymore. The plasma rifle racks were gone. The ammunition storage was empty. Instead, the main courtyard had been transformed into something that belonged in a museum or a medieval fair. Private Borum stood in formation with 40 other soldiers, holding a recurved bow that was taller than she was. The weapon felt strange in her hands. She had trained with plasma rifles at the academy. She had fired railguns in simulation. She had never held a bow before arriving at Firebase Jericho 3 weeks ago. Next to her, Corporal Taeyong gripped a heavy crossbow. It was nothing like the ancient wooden crossbows from history books. This one had a carbon fiber body, a scope with computer-assisted targeting, and a draw weight that would have been impossible for medieval soldiers to manage. But the principle was the same. Pull back the string. Load the bolt. Fire. Sergeant Yuna walked down the line, inspecting each soldier's weapon. She carried what everyone called a tactical slingshot. It looked ridiculous at first glance. A Y-shaped frame made of aerospace-grade aluminum with surgical rubber tubing attached. But Yuna had demonstrated what it could do. She had launched a steel ball bearing through a wooden board from 50 meters away. The soldiers had stopped laughing after that. This is insane, Borum whispered to Taeyong during a water break. We're going to fight aliens with toys. They have plasma rifles and energy shields. We have rubber bands and sticks. Keep your voice down, Taeyong warned. But he didn't disagree. Captain Minji appeared behind them. Both soldiers snapped to attention immediately. Minji had been running them through drills for 18 hours a day. She accepted no complaints. She tolerated no weakness. "You think these are toys?" Minji asked calmly. "No, ma'am," Borom said quickly. "I just meant, in 1415 at the Battle of Agincourt, English longbowmen killed thousands of French knights," Minji interrupted. "The French had the best armor in the world, the best horses, the best training. They were slaughtered by men with wooden bows. Do you know why?" Borom shook her head. "Because the English had been practicing archery since childhood. Because their bows could punch through armor at close range. Because they understood tactics that the French had forgotten." Minji gestured toward the training field. "The Vrin have energy shields calibrated for plasma and railgun fire. Their armor disperses heat and absorbs high-velocity impacts. Nobody has designed defensive technology for arrows in 10,000 years. Do you understand what that means?" "We'll go right through them," Taeyong said slowly. "Exactly," Minji pointed to Lieutenant Hagen, who was demonstrating a compound crossbow. He aimed at a target dummy wearing captured Vrin armor. The bolt flew straight and true. It punched through the armor's chest plate and embedded itself deep in the ballistic gel underneath. The soldiers watching let out low whistles of surprise. "Modern materials with ancient principles," Minji continued. "We can't match their technology directly. So we don't try, we go backward. We use weapons they've forgotten how to defend against." Borom looked at her bow with new eyes. It wasn't a toy. It was a weapon that humans had used to conquer entire continents. And the modern version, made with composite materials and precision engineering, was far deadlier than anything her ancestors had carried. Training intensified over the next 2 weeks. The soldiers learned to compensate for gravity drop over distance. They practiced firing while moving. They studied wind patterns and how they affected arrow flight. The crossbow teams learned to reload quickly while under pressure. The slingshot teams practiced hitting moving targets. What surprised everyone was how naturally humans adapted to these weapons. Millions of years of evolution had shaped human bodies for throwing and aiming. Their shoulder joints rotated in ways that many alien species couldn't replicate. Their depth perception, developed for hunting, made them natural marksmen. Skills that had seemed primitive were actually sophisticated applications of human biology. Lieutenant Hagen discovered something interesting in the old training manuals. Ancient archers used something called instinctive shooting. They didn't aim consciously. They looked at the target and let their bodies calculate the trajectory automatically. It took years to develop this skill with traditional training. But with modern virtual reality simulations and neural feedback, they could accelerate the learning process dramatically. Soldiers spent hours in VR chambers, shooting at simulated targets until the motion became automatic. Their muscles learned the feel of drawing a bow. Their eyes learned to judge distance without thinking. Their brains formed new neural pathways. Then Sergeant Yuna made a discovery that changed everything. She was walking through the civilian section of the base when she heard a sharp crack followed by the clang of metal. She investigated and found a young boy in the maintenance yard. He was maybe 12 years old, holding a homemade slingshot. Empty ration cans were lined up on a fence. As Yuna watched, the boy loaded a smooth stone, pulled back, and fired. The can flew off the fence. "Hey kid," Yuna called out. "Do that again." The boy turned. He looked nervous, probably thinking he was in trouble. "I wasn't breaking anything, I promise. I clean up all the cans after. I don't care about the cans." "I want to see you shoot." The boy's name was Sunwoo. His mother, Jiwan, was a civilian engineer assigned to the base's maintenance division. Sunwoo had been building and using slingshots since he was 6 years old. He had watched historical documentaries about David and Goliath, about ancient hunters, about survival techniques. While other kids played video games, Sunwoo practiced with his slingshots. Yuna set up a new test. She placed a can 40 meters away. "Hit that!" Sunwoo loaded a stone. He pulled back. A stone flew in a flat arc and struck the can dead center. "Again, but this time I'll throw the can in the air. Hit it while it's moving." "That's really hard," Sunwoo said. "Try." Yuna tossed the can high into the air. Sunwoo tracked it with his eyes, led the target, and fired. The stone intercepted the cannon midair. It made a satisfying ping sound. Yuna stared. Then she grabbed her radio. "Captain Minji, you need to see this." 10 minutes later, Minji and Heijin stood in the maintenance yard, watching Sunwoo perform. They set up harder and harder tests, moving targets. Distant targets? Small targets? The boy hit them all with calm precision. "How did you get this good?" Minji asked. Sunwoo shrugged. "I just practice a lot. My mom says I'm obsessed. I like figuring out the physics, trajectory, velocity, energy transfer. It's like math, but fun." Heijin pulled up the boy's school records on his datapad. He's got perfect scores in mathematics and physics. His teachers say he's gifted. Minji crouched down to Sunwoo's eye level. "How would you like to help us, Sunwoo? We're training soldiers to use slingshots. But honestly, I don't think any of them are as good as you." The boy's eyes went wide. "Really? You want my help?" "We do. With your mother's permission, of course." Jiwon had come running when she heard her son was talking to the base commander. She looked worried until Minji explained. Then she looked proud. "If he can help, he should help," Jiwon said. "But he stays safe. He's not going into combat." "Agreed," Minji said. "He'll be a trainer. And if trouble comes to us, he'll be behind our defensive lines." So Sunwoo joined the training program. The soldiers were skeptical at first. Taking advice from a 12-year-old seemed ridiculous. But after watching him shoot, their doubts vanished. He could explain instinctively what they were doing wrong. He understood the physics better than most of them. Private Boram found that Sunwoo's advice actually helped her archery too. The principles were similar: consistent form, smooth release, trusting your instincts. As the 3-month mark approached, Firebase Jericho had transformed. 50 soldiers, who had never held a bow 3 months ago, could now hit targets at 100 meters. Crossbow teams could reload and fire in under 3 seconds. Slingshot specialists could disable equipment from 50 meters away. Captain Minji stood on the base wall at sunset, watching her troops train. Lieutenant Heijin joined her. "Do you think we're ready?" he asked. "No," Minji said honestly. "We've had 3 months to learn skills that medieval soldiers spent lifetimes mastering. But we have advantages they didn't: modern materials, computer targeting, understanding of physics. And we have something else." "What's that?" "We have surprise. The Vryn think we're helpless now. They think the treaty destroyed us. They're about to learn they made a terrible mistake." In orbit above Kepler 442b, Vryn scouts were already watching the human base. They saw the strange training. They saw the primitive weapons. They reported back to their commanders. The reports included phrases like "no credible threat" and "easy target." The Vryn planned their attack for dawn, 3 days away. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Dawn came to Firebase Jericho with red skies. The planet's dual suns rose slowly over the mining settlement, painting everything in shades of orange and crimson. Private Boram stood at her post on the eastern wall, her bow in hand. She had been awake for 2 hours already, running through mental exercises. Draw, aim, release. Draw, aim, release. The motion had to be automatic. The alarm sounded at 0600 hours. "Incoming Vryn transports," Lieutenant Heijin's voice crackled over the radio. 6 vehicles, estimated 40 soldiers. All units to defensive positions. Boram's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. 3 months of training with weapons that belonged in history books. Now they would find out if Captain Minji's crazy plan would actually work. The Vryn transports came fast, kicking up dust as they approached the settlement. They were sleek vehicles, powered by fusion engines, armored with composite plating. Through her scope, Boram could see Vryn soldiers in powered exoskeletons. They carried plasma rifles that glowed with barely contained energy. The transport stopped 500 meters from the base. The Vryn soldiers disembarked in perfect formation. Their leader, identified by red markings on his armor, walked forward confidently. He was broadcasting on an open channel that the humans could hear. "Human defenders," the Vryn leader announced, his voice translated by computer. "The kinetic weapons ban is now in effect. You have no weapons. Surrender your mining equipment and evacuate this world. You have 1 hour to comply. Captain Minji stood on the command wall, visible to the Vryn forces. She raised one hand. Behind her, 50 soldiers stood in formation. Each one held a bow, crossbow, or slingshot. The Vryn leader stared. For a moment, there was silence across the battlefield. The Vryn started laughing. It came through their communications, a harsh hissing sound. Several Vryn soldiers pointed at the human weapons. One made a gesture that was probably their equivalent of mockery. "What is this?" the Vryn leader broadcast. "Some kind of primitive ceremony? You face modern soldiers with wooden toys?" Minji lowered her hand. Corporal Taiyang pulled the trigger on his crossbow. The bolt flew straight and true. It covered the distance in less than a second. The Vryn leader's shields didn't activate. Why would they? The shields were calibrated to detect and block plasma bolts and high-velocity bullets. A simple wooden shaft moving at 90 meters per second didn't register as a threat. The bolt caught the Vryn leader in the throat, right through the gap between his helmet and chest armor. The alien staggered backward and collapsed. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. The Vryn soldiers stared at their fallen leader. The humans held their positions. Then chaos erupted. 20 crossbows fired simultaneously. The Vryn had expected plasma fire, so their shields were powered up and ready. But the shields did nothing. Against solid projectiles moving at speeds their sensors considered too slow to matter. Bolts punched through armor joints, caught soldiers in the neck and legs, struck weapon hands. "All archer units, fire at will," Heijun commanded. Borum drew her bow and released. Her first arrow missed, flying over the Vryn formation. She forced herself to breathe, to remember her training. She knocked another arrow. This time she aimed slightly lower. The arrow arced through the air and struck a Vryn soldier in the shoulder joint. The alien's arm went limp, his plasma rifle falling to the ground. Beside her, 15 other archers found their rhythm. Arrows fell from the sky like rain. The Vryn were used to fighting in 2 dimensions, exchanging horizontal fire with enemies. They weren't prepared for plunging fire from above. Their armor protected their fronts and backs. It didn't protect the tops of their heads or their shoulders. A Vryn squad leader barked orders. His soldiers broke formation and ran for cover behind their transports. It was the tactically correct response to ranged fire. But it meant they had lost the initiative. Slingshot teams now. Sergeant Yuna's voice cut through the noise. 20 soldiers stepped forward, each holding a tactical slingshot. They loaded steel ball bearings and tungsten slugs. Modern materials and computer-assisted. Aiming made these weapons far deadlier than the simple slings David had used against Goliath. The first volley of projectiles hit the Vryn with devastating effect. A steel ball bearing moving at 200 meters per second struck a Vryn helmet. The helmet cracked. The alien inside went down. Another bearing hit a plasma rifle, and the weapon exploded from internal damage. The Vryn commander, an older alien named Velcros, crouched behind his command transport. He was screaming into his radio. "What is happening? What are they using?" "Primitive weapons, Commander," his second replied. "Bows and slings." "That's impossible. Those can't penetrate our armor." "They're not penetrating the armor, sir. They're going through the gaps." Velcros risked a look over the transport. He saw his soldiers pinned down by a constant rain of projectiles. 3 were dead, 7 were wounded. The rest were too busy taking cover to return fire. This wasn't how battles were supposed to go. The Vryn had superior technology. They had energy weapons and powered armor. They should be unstoppable. "Call for air support," Velcros ordered. "We need orbital strikes on their positions." His communications officer tried to comply. But before he could send the signal, something struck the transport's antenna array. The impact was precise, surgical. The antenna exploded in sparks and smoke on the fire-based Jericho wall. 12-year-old Sunwoo lowered his slingshot. His mother Jiwan stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. She looked terrified but proud. "Good shot," Lieutenant Heijun said calmly. He consulted his tactical display. "Target their engine systems next." "I want those transports disabled," Sunwoo nodded. He loaded a specialized ceramic projectile designed to shatter mechanical components. He pulled back the surgical tubing, feeling the tension build. His mathematics teacher had taught him about potential and kinetic energy. Now he was demonstrating those principles in the most practical way possible. He aimed for the nearest transport's engine housing. The target was small, maybe 30 centimeters square, at a distance of over 100 meters. Wind was blowing from the east at 15 kilometers per hour. The planet's gravity was slightly higher than Earth standard. Sunwoo made the calculations. Automatically, his brain processing variables faster than conscious thought. He released. The projectile flew in a perfect arc. It struck the engine housing dead center. The housing cracked. Coolant began leaking from the damage. The transport's fusion engine started overheating. Again, Heijun said. Next transport. The Vryn soldiers tried to mount a counterattack. They returned fire with their plasma rifles, sending bolts of superheated energy toward the human positions. But the humans were dug in behind defensive walls. The plasma fire scorched stone and metal but caused few casualties. Meanwhile, the arrows and bolts and slingshot projectiles kept coming. The Vryn had no defense against them. Their shields didn't activate. Their armor had gaps that had never mattered before. They were being killed by weapons their ancestors had abandoned 10,000 years ago. Commander Velcros made a decision. All units fall back to the transports. Prepare for retreat. His soldiers didn't need to be told twice. They ran for the vehicles, dragging their wounded. Several more fell to arrows during the withdrawal. It was chaos, a complete rout. The transports lifted off, their engines screaming. One of them trailed smoke from the engine Sunwoo had damaged. They disappeared over the horizon at maximum speed on the battlefield. The Vryn had left behind their dead and some of their wounded. Medical teams from Firebase Jericho moved out carefully to help the injured aliens. Captain Minji had been clear about this. They were proving a point, not committing atrocities. Mingji walked along the defensive wall, counting her forces. Not a single human casualty. A few minor injuries from spent plasma bolts, nothing serious. Meanwhile, the Vryn had suffered at least 8 dead and 15 wounded. Mission successful, Lieutenant Heijun reported, his voice showing his disbelief. Enemy forces retreated. Base is secure. Private Borom sat down heavily, her bow across her lap. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Corporal Taiyang clapped her on the shoulder. We did it, he said. We actually did it. Sergeant Yuna gathered her slingshot team. Several of them were laughing, high on victory and relief. Good work, everyone, but stay sharp. They'll be back. Sunwoo climbed down from the wall, his mother fussing over him. Jiwan checked him for injuries even though he had been in one of the safest positions on the base. I was so scared, Jiwan whispered, but you were so brave. I just did what Lieutenant Heijun told me to, Sunwoo said. But he was smiling. Captain Minji called an assembly in the main courtyard. All 50 soldiers gathered along with the civilian staff. They looked tired but triumphant. Today we proved something important, Minji said. The galaxy thought they had neutralized us with their treaty. They thought without modern weapons we would be helpless. They forgot that humans have been warriors. For thousands of years before we ever invented gunpowder. We've just reminded them. She paused, looking at each face in the crowd. But this isn't over. The Vryn will report what happened here. Other species will hear about it, some will adapt. Some will change their tactics. We need to stay ahead of them. What do we do now? Someone asked. Minji smiled grimly. We train harder. Commander Velcro sat in his command ship, watching medical teams treat his wounded soldiers. His hands shook with rage and humiliation. He had led 17 successful raids across 4 star systems. He had conquered colonies and broken resistance movements. He had never lost a battle until today. They used wood, one of his officers said, staring at a retrieved arrow. The shaft was carbon fiber, not actual wood, but the principle was ancient. How did they defeat us with wood? Velcros grabbed the arrow and snapped it in half. We were caught by surprise. That's all. They won't surprise us again. But he knew it was more complicated than that. The humans had exploited weaknesses in Vryn equipment that nobody had thought to address. Energy shields were designed for modern weapons. Alma was built to disperse heat and stop high-velocity rounds. Nobody had considered that someone might attack with low-velocity solid projectiles. "What are your orders, Commander?" His second asked. Velcros pulled up a tactical map of the mining settlement. Firebase Jericho sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills. The humans had chosen their position well. They had clear sight lines and defensive advantages. "We return in 3 days," Velcro said. "But this time we bring everything. Double the soldiers. Heavy transports. Suppression drones? We crush them with overwhelming force." His officers looked relieved. This was the Velcros they knew, aggressive, decisive, confident. But privately Velcros felt doubt creeping in. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had made ancient weapons effective against modern armor. If they were that creative, what else might they have prepared? At Firebase Jericho, Captain Minji stood in the operations room, planning for the inevitable counterattack. Lieutenant Hagen had deployed surveillance drones to monitor Vryn movements. The reports were concerning. "They're massing forces," Hagen said, pointing to the holographic display. "At least 80 soldiers now. Maybe more. And they're bringing heavier equipment." They'll come in force this time," Minji agreed. "They won't underestimate us again." "Can we hold against those numbers?" Private Borum asked. She had been promoted to squad leader after her performance in the first battle. "We held once," Minji said. "We can hold again, but we need to be smarter. They'll expect arrows and crossbows now. We need to show them we have more surprises." Over the next 3 days, the humans worked frantically to prepare. Engineers developed new projectile types. Chemists created compounds that would burn when exposed to air. Blacksmiths forged different arrowhead designs for different purposes. Corporal Taeyang worked with the crossbow teams to develop specialized bolts. Some had broad blades designed to cause maximum damage. Others had barbed tips that were nearly impossible to remove from armor. Still, others carried small explosive charges that would detonate on impact. "Wait," Borum said when she saw the explosive bolts. "Won't those violate the treaty?" "They use explosive propellant." "The explosive is in the warhead, not the propellant," Taeyang explained. "The bow is still using mechanical energy to launch the bolt. The explosion happens after impact." "Different thing entirely." Sergeant Yuna's slingshot teams received new ammunition types. Smoke rounds that would obscure vision, fragmenting pellets that would shatter into shrapnel. Even small gas capsules filled with chemical irritants. "Their helmets filter plasma heat and radiation," Yuna explained to her teams. "But they don't filter simple chemical compounds. These capsules will make their eyes water and their throats burn. Non-lethal but effective." The archers practiced with fire arrows. The tips were wrapped in material soaked with a chemical compound that ignited when exposed to oxygen. The flames would stick to shields and armor, creating problems that energy shields couldn't solve. Sunwoo worked with the engineering team to create specialized projectiles for his slingshot. Some were designed to shatter communications equipment. Others could pierce fuel lines or damage sensors. He practiced hitting smaller and smaller targets until he could strike a 10-centimeter circle at 100 meters. His mother Jiwan tried not to watch. Every time Sunwoo practiced, she was reminded that her 12-year-old son might have to use these skills in real combat. But she also understood that his unique abilities might save lives. On the third day, the Vryn returned. They came at noon this time, not dawn. Velcros had learned from his mistakes. He brought 12 transports instead of 6, 80 soldiers instead of 40. He deployed suppression drones that would circle the battlefield and provide covering fire. "All units to defensive positions," Captain Minji ordered. "Remember your training? Remember what we're fighting for." The Vryn forces deployed in a much more cautious formation this time. They spread out, making themselves harder targets. They moved from cover to cover. They used their transports as mobile shields. Velcros stood behind his command vehicle, studying the human defenses through binoculars. He saw soldiers with bows and crossbows just like before, but this time he was ready. "Forward units, advance with shields raised," he commanded. "Suppression drones, keep their heads down. We're going to walk right through them." The Vryn soldiers began their advance. This time their shields were active even before they detected incoming fire. The shields glowed with protective energy. Private Borum aimed her bow at the advancing soldiers. She waited for Captain Minji's signal. The Vryn came closer. 50 meters. 40 meters. "Fire arrows loose." Minji commanded. 20 archers released simultaneously. The arrows streaked through the air, flames trailing behind them. They struck Vryn shields and stuck there, burning intensely. The chemical compounds burned hot enough to start melting shield generators. The Vryn shields began flickering and failing. Soldiers tried to brush off the burning arrows, but the chemical flames clung to their gauntlets. Crossbow teams fire. Corporal Taeyong's team launched their specialized bolts. Some had broadheads that caused terrible wounds even through armor. Others carried small explosive charges that detonated against shields, overloading the generators. The Vryn advance faltered. Slingshot teams deploy smoke and gas rounds. Sergeant Yuna's teams launched their special ammunition. Smoke rounds burst among the Vryn formation, obscuring visibility. Gas capsules shattered against helmets, and chemical irritants seeped through ventilation systems. Vryn soldiers coughed and choked, their eyes streaming with tears. Commander Velcros watched his carefully planned attack disintegrate into confusion. "This is impossible. We have superior technology." "They're adapting, Commander," his second said. "Every time we counter one tactic, they show us something new." Velcros snarled. "Bring up the heavy transports. Deploy the siege weapons. If we can't shoot them, we'll level their entire base." 2 massive transports moved forward. They carried plasma cannons designed for destroying fortifications. The cannons began charging, their energy coils glowing brighter and brighter. "Sunwoo," Lieutenant Hagen said calmly. "Can you disable those cannons?" The boy studied the heavy transports through his scope. The plasma cannons were protected by thick armor plating, but the power conduits running from the engines to the weapons were exposed on the transport sides. "I can try," Sunwoo said. He loaded a ceramic penetrator round. This projectile was designed to punch through light armor and shatter inside, causing maximum internal damage. He aimed for the power conduit on the first transport. The distance was over 150 meters. The target was maybe 20 centimeters wide. Wind was gusting unpredictably. Sunwoo took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He released. The projectile flew in a high arc. It dropped toward the target. For a moment, it looked like it would miss. Then it struck the power conduit perfectly. The conduit shattered. Electricity arced wildly. The plasma cannon's charge sequence failed, and the weapon went dark. "One more," Hagen said. Sunwoo reloaded. His hands were steady despite his racing heart. He aimed at the second transport's power conduit. This time he adjusted for a crosswind he had felt on the first shot. Released. The projectile struck true. The second cannon went offline. Commander Velcro saw both his siege weapons disabled within seconds of each other. He pulled up video feeds trying to see what had hit them. His sensors showed small projectiles moving at speeds that barely registered as threats. "Who is shooting those?" he demanded. One of his officers magnified the video feed. On the human defensive wall, they could see a small figure with a slingshot. "Commander," the officer said slowly, "I think that's a child." Velcro stared. A human child had just disabled 2 military-grade siege weapons with what looked like a toy. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so humiliating. "All units, fall back," Velcro's ordered. "This engagement is over." "But Commander, we still have numerical superiority," I said. "Fall back." Velcro's roared. "We're losing soldiers to primitive weapons. Our shields don't work? Our armor has too many gaps? We need to completely rethink our approach." The Vryn forces retreated again, leaving more dead and wounded behind. This time the withdrawal was organized and professional, but it was still a retreat. Captain Minji watched them go. They had held. Against twice the forces, with better tactics and heavier weapons, the Vryn had still failed to break through. "Status report," she requested. "3 wounded, none serious," Heijin replied. "We're down to 60% ammunition for arrows and bolts. Slingshot ammunition is still good." 3 weeks after the second battle at Firebase Jericho, Ambassador Doyon stood once again before the Galactic Council. This time, the atmosphere was very different from his last visit. The chamber buzzed with angry voices. Representatives from 24 species were demanding answers. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed footage from the battles. Arrows striking Vryn soldiers. Crossbow bolts punching through armor. A human child disabling siege weapons with a slingshot. The footage had been shared across every major news network in the galaxy. Everyone had seen it. "This is a mockery of the treaty," the Vryn representative shouted. He was not the same official who had been present when the treaty was signed. That one had been quietly removed from his position after the embarrassing defeats. "The humans are attacking our forces with weapons that should be in museums." "Attacking?" Doyon asked calmly. "My understanding is that Vryn forces raided a human mining settlement. Twice our soldiers defended themselves using legal weapons." "Legal?" The Vryn representative pointed at the holographic display. "Those weapons are barbaric." "But legal," Doyon repeated. "The kinetic weapons ban prohibits explosive propellant-based projectile weapons. Crossbows use mechanical tension. Bows use limb flex. Slingshots use elastic potential energy. None of these violate the treaty's actual wording." The council legal advisor, a Nexal named Tekris, consulted his datapad. His multiple eyes scanned the treaty documents. His face, which could express hundreds of emotions through color changes, shifted through several shades before settling on a pale gray that indicated professional dismay. "He is technically correct," Tekris announced. "The treaty's language specifically addresses explosive propellants. These ancient human weapons operate on entirely different physical principles." The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded the treaty be rewritten immediately. Others accused the humans of acting in bad faith. A few seemed amused by the whole situation. The council chair, the ancient Zelthari named Vorian, raised one of his many limbs for silence. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. "Ambassador Doyon," Vorian said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Did humanity deliberately seek out a loophole in our treaty?" Doyon could have lied. He could have claimed it was an accident, that they had stumbled onto this solution by chance. But he respected Vorian too much for that. "Yes," Doyon said simply. "We read the treaty very carefully. We noted what was prohibited. We made use of what was not." "That is sophistry," someone shouted. "That is how law works," Doyon replied. "The council has existed for 3,000 years. In that time, every member species has found creative interpretations of treaties and regulations. The Nexal Trade Syndicate used regulatory loopholes to dominate shipping for 2 centuries. The Vryn themselves have used territorial definition debates to claim 17 disputed systems." "Should I continue?" Silence fell. He was right, and everyone knew it. "The difference," the Vryn representative said coldly, "is that our loopholes did not involve killing people with primitive weapons." "Your forces were killed while attempting to seize human territory," Doyon said. "Perhaps the embarrassment is not that you lost. Perhaps it is how you lost." The Vryn representative lunged forward, stopped only by 2 security officers. The chamber descended into chaos again. Vorian called for order. When silence finally returned, he fixed Doyon with an intense stare. "Ambassador, I must ask you a difficult question. Are you proud of what your species has done? Bringing ancient weapons of war back into the galaxy?" Doyon considered the question carefully. "Proud? No, we are not proud of violence, no matter what tools are used. But we are not ashamed either. The Council created a treaty that you all believed would neuter humanity. You thought without our modern weapons we would be defenseless, vulnerable, easy targets." He paused, letting that sink in. You forgot something important about humans. We have been fighting and surviving for 200,000 years. We did not begin as the dominant species on our world. We were prey animals once, weak, slow, no claws or fangs. But we learned to make tools. We learned to hunt. We learned to kill things much stronger than ourselves. That skill set does not disappear just because we also learned to build starships. Doyan pulled up images on his own datapad and projected them into the chamber. Images of human history. Stone Age hunters bringing down mammoths. Roman legions conquering continents. Medieval archers at Agincourt. Zulu warriors defeating modern rifles with spears and shields. This is what you invited into your council, Doyan continued. A species that has never stopped being dangerous. You just changed which tools we're allowed to use. So we adapted, because that is what humans do. The chamber was silent now. Some representatives looked angry. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked frightened. The treaty will be amended, Vorian announced. All projectile weapons will be banned, regardless of propulsion method. Of course, Doyan agreed pleasantly. We will comply with the new treaty just as we complied with the old one. The way he said it made several representatives very nervous. Back on Kepler 442b, Captain Minji received news of the council session. She gathered her soldiers in the main courtyard to share the update. The treaty is being rewritten, she announced. Bows, crossbows, slings, everything we've been using will be banned within 60 days. The soldiers looked disappointed but not surprised. They had known this was coming, so what do we do now? Private Borum asked. Minji smiled. We adapt again. She gestured to Lieutenant Hagen, who pulled up new schematics on a holographic display. The soldiers leaned in to look. If they ban projectiles entirely, we move to directed energy weapons that don't use plasma, Hagen explained. Sonic weapons that use sound waves to disable enemies? Microwave emitters that cause pain but don't kill. Electromagnetic pulse devices that shut down electronics. And if they ban those? Corporal Taiyong asked. Then we use chemical weapons, Sergeant Yuna said. Tear gas, pepper spray, smoke grenades. None of those are technically weapons of war under most treaties. And if they ban chemicals? Melee weapons, Minji said. Swords, spears, staffs, humans practiced with those for thousands of years too. The soldiers were starting to understand. There was no treaty the council could write that would make humanity truly defenseless. Every restriction just forced humans to be more creative. Sunwoo raised his hand like he was in school. What about me? If slingshots are banned, what do I do? Hagen ruffled the boy's hair. We'll find something. You have a gift for precision throwing. That skill transfers to all kinds of applications. Young Sunwoo had become something of a celebrity. His footage disabling siege weapons had been viewed billions of times across the galaxy. News services had interviewed his mother. Military academies had requested his training methods. He was just 12 years old, and he had changed modern warfare. Jiwan watched her son with mixed feelings. She was proud of him. But she also worried about the attention and the responsibility being placed on such young shoulders. We'll keep you safe, Minji promised her. But we also need people like Sunwoo. His skills might save lives. 3 days later, Ambassador Doyan sent a private message to Captain Minji. It contained a single line of text and a smile emoji. They're already arguing about how to define projectile in the new treaty. This could take years. Minji laughed when she read it. The galaxy had no idea what they had gotten themselves into by trying to disarm humanity across the galaxy. Military strategists were having similar realizations. The humans had shown that advanced technology was not always necessary for effective combat. They had demonstrated that ancient principles could defeat modern defenses. They had proven that human creativity and adaptability were their most dangerous weapons. Some species began researching their own historical weapons, wondering if they had abandoned useful tools too quickly. Others started redesigning their armor and shields to account for low-velocity projectiles. A few began developing entirely new defensive concepts, but the most important change was psychological. Before the battles at Firebase Jericho, most alien species had viewed humans as newcomers to the galactic community. Interesting but not particularly threatening. Now they understood that humanity had been an apex predator species for hundreds of thousands of years. That legacy did not disappear just because humans also enjoyed art and music and philosophy. Commander Velcros, stripped of his rank and position, watched news coverage from his home. He saw analysts discussing human tactics. He saw military experts trying to understand how such primitive weapons had been so effective. He saw himself becoming a cautionary tale. "Never underestimate humans," he heard one analyst say. "They have been surviving and fighting since before most of our civilizations existed. They know violence in ways we've forgotten." Velcros turned off the news. He had learned that lesson the hard way. At Firebase Jericho, life slowly returned to normal. The mining operations continued. Civilian staff went about their work. But everyone knew things had changed. They were no longer just miners and settlers. They were the people who had defended themselves against impossible odds, using weapons from ancient history. Private Borum kept her bow. It hung on her wall, a reminder of what they had accomplished.